The government has confirmed a second flight for Australians stranded in the Chinese city of Wuhan province is being organised as it tries to limit the spread of the coronavirus. The Prime Minister says that will mark the end of the government's assistance with any Australians who do not board the second flight able to use commercial flights coming out of the mainland. Let's go live now back to Canberra. The Commissioner of Australian Border Force, Michael Outram, joins us now. Thanks so much for your time, Commissioner. First of all, can I ask you, the government is looking at some mainland facilities for quarantining. Are you assisting with identifying some of those locations?
Yeah, firstly, good morning, Laura, and thank you very much. At the moment, we're very much focused on our facilities at Christmas Island, of course, in relation to the people that are being brought back to Australia from Wuhan and assisting those people to get through the next 2 weeks and then back on with their lives and back onto the mainland. That's our primary focus right now. Of course, we don't know quite how this virus is going to play out into the future. So, of course, as Minister Dutton said yesterday afternoon, we are now looking at other contingency options that might be available in the future should they be needed.
So at what point would those contingency options be needed? Is Christmas Island nearing capacity? Can it cope with this second plane load of Australians to come out of Wuhan? And then if this crisis broadens, that's when you'll have to look elsewhere?
So we're working with Professor Murphy and his team on the ground, the AUSMAT team and Department of Defence people on the ground there in Christmas Island. Clearly, with a quarantining point of view, in terms of quarantine facilities, the more compartmentalisation or segregation you can get between smaller groups, the better. Like you just heard about the experience of the person on the cruise ship, they're confined to their room. Of course, the facilities on Christmas Island aren't like a cruise ship. We don't necessarily have all the ensuite amenities and all the luxury amenities that I imagine will be available on a cruise ship. So these are really detailed planning exercises that have been undertaken on Christmas Island to work through how we can make the facilities and the amenity there work best. We're trying to make the plans so that we can accommodate all the people from Wuhan province onto Christmas Island at the moment.
So how small are the groups of quarantining within Christmas Island? Are they confined to families or are they a bit broader than that?
Yeah, the facility is broader than that. Of course, people do have individual rooms, but we're having to put in place an infection control plan in the facility with our health colleagues that's going to make sure that if there is an infection, and by the way, there isn't so far, which is great news, but if there were an infection, we don't want the clock to be wound back to 14 days for everybody there. That's the primary purpose.
Right, so are they confined to their rooms on Christmas Island or no?
No, people are not confined to rooms. There's a management plan in place. Of course, people are, of course, being required to wear masks and gloves and those sorts of things to prevent cross-contamination.
Okay, how many passengers have been stopped at the border and turned away at any airports?
Yeah, so we've returned 52 people have chosen to go back voluntarily. The most important part of this, of course, what happens in other countries. So on Saturday night, when the Prime Minister made his announcement, from about 6:30 on Saturday night, the 1st of February, we started engaging with all of the airlines that bring people to Australia. And by 9:30 on Saturday night, we'd issued an instruction to those airlines that made clear the decision of the government. And of course, everyone's familiar with those instructions. And so from 9:30 p.m. on Saturday night, airlines ceased uplifting passengers or allowing passengers to go on their airplanes that didn't fulfil the criteria, they were non-Australian citizens or residents, etc. We've also had to engage with airlines in other countries, and we've denied, through our border operations centre here in Canberra, uplift for 207 passengers. We've also had 87 flights from mainland China, direct flights cancelled. So the number of passengers coming from mainland China has reduced dramatically since the 1st of February. So the decision of the government, the announcement from the Prime Minister, has been given operational effect, and it's having the impact that we desired. And of course, the main thing here is to keep our community, to keep Australians safe, and to prevent or delay significantly this virus from coming to Australia.
Okay, so as we look at this coronavirus outbreak, the biggest problem still remains in China. We've seen a lot of infections in other countries, about 32 infections in people that haven't actually been to China. Are you considering, of course, along with the government, stopping any flights or beefing up, I guess, quarantining or at least monitoring for passengers from any other countries?
Yeah, it's a really good question. Indeed, we do. So, firstly, all our actions that we're taking and the decisions that have been taken are based on sound and expert medical advice. We have world-class experts here in Australia, of course, led by Professor Murphy and his team, and he's engaged, of course, daily with all his state and territory counterparts. That's the first point. But we do monitor all flights coming into Australia. We get advanced passenger information here about all passengers that are boarding flights, and the directions that were provided on a Saturday night weren't just provided to mainland China. They were provided to all airlines that carry passengers to Australia from anywhere. So yes, we are absolutely monitoring all flights into Australia, and we've asked airlines to be vigilant in terms of checking passports of passengers to make sure that they haven't got stamps that show that they were in or travelling through mainland China since the 1st of February.
Okay, just finally back to my original question about those contingency plans outside of Christmas Island that we talked about. Can you name any facilities on the mainland that would be ready to go should that contingency be needed? We're talking about, our reporter Matt Cunningham has spoken about an area just outside of Darwin.
I don't think there are any that you would say are just ready to go, and that's why, of course, we chose Christmas Island in the first place, because we had Northwest Point up there on Christmas Island that was ready to go, and of course it was stood up in a matter of days and is being used now. But there are a number of options we would look at, and like other countries, you know, other countries utilising defence assets, defence bases, mining camps or whatever. So we're looking at a range of options around the country.
Can you narrow it down to locations or states?
Not at this point in time, Laura. I'd prefer not to do it at this point in time, because obviously these are contingency plans. They're not well developed and refined at this point. We're just working out what the options would be for us were they to be needed. Okay,
fair enough. But do you have half a dozen, 12 that you might be looking at, or is it far less than that?
It's less than that, because some of these facilities are very big, and until the medical... Of course, what I would say to all of our communities, we're not panicking here. At the moment, of course, the travel restrictions apply to people who've been in or through mainland China, and within mainland China, of course, we've put special provisions in place for people in Hubei province, of course, the epicentre of this outbreak, and that's really the focus at the moment. At this point in time, when you look at the global population, the movement of passengers, the numbers of movement of passengers, and the number of infections, they're really low. So we don't want to overreact. But of course, we've been very, very proactive here in Australia, and I think so far that's been very effective. So we're not looking at the moment at 12, 15 sort of camps. We're looking at, okay, what would be available to us were we to need it.